to Narrow Path Doctrine. My name is Jim. Been reading the book of Acts here lately, so probably a few videos spattered around from several verses in the book of Acts, because there's just so much in that book. I want to set the scene here. First of all, the Jerusalem Council is convened. The great question before the apostles and elders is whether Gentile believers must submit to circumcision and the law of Moses for salvation. Peter rises, here called by his Hebrew name Simeon, and he rehearses what God had already accomplished at the house of Cornelius. James then confirms Peter's testimony by anchoring it in the prophet Amos. But before James turns to the Old Testament, he summarizes Peter's entire report in one dense, theologically loaded sentence, and it really is. That sentence is Acts 15:14. It says, Simeon hath declared how God at the first did visit the Gentiles to take out of them a people for his name. Now, let's not simply pass over this verse quickly. Every word is doing sovereign work, and we'll dig into that here next. The initiative belongs entirely to God. The text doesn't say that the Gentiles sought God, inquired after God, or made themselves available to God. It says God visited. The Greek word here means to look upon with purposeful intention, to come with intent to act. This is the language of divine condescension and sovereign movement. God came down, God looked, God acted. The Gentiles were the objects of this visitation, not the initiators of it. This immediately overthrows any Arminian or synergistic framework. If salvation begins with God's visit, then it cannot simultaneously begin with man's autonomous free will choice. The first mover in this text, without qualification, is God Almighty. This phrase points to priority, both chronological and logical. God's election doesn't respond to foreseen faith. His decree is prior. Before the gospel went to Cornelius, before Peter knocked on that door, before a single Gentile heart stirred with longing, God had already purposed to take a people for himself from the nations. The first is God's eternal counsel, working itself out in time at Caesarea. This is the Reformed doctrine of unconditional election, written in narrative form. God didn't wait to see who would respond. He visited in order to take. Here is the heart of the matter. The word translated take carries the idea of selecting, extracting, and separating from the whole. God didn't come to make salvation possible for all Gentiles indiscriminately. He came to take out, to extract a specific company from within the mass of the Gentile nations. This isn't the language of an offer made and left to human acceptance. This is the language of a sovereign who reaches into a people and takes what he has determined to take. The Gentiles as a whole mass were not saved, of course, but out of them God takes a people. The rest remain in their sin and condemnation, not because God passively overlooked them, but because God actively decreed their reprobation just as surely as he decreed the election of his own. Notice the result of the divine taking, a people, not scattered individuals accidentally converted, not a random sampling of those who happen to respond on some particular day. God takes out a people, a corporate body defined, unified, and constituted by his own sovereign act of election. And for what purpose? For his name, not for their happiness as the primary end, not for the fulfillment of human potential. The telos, the final purpose of divine election, is the glory of God's name. Election serves doxology. God is gathering a people who will display his grace, bear his name, and magnify his glory before the nations and before the ages. This is the language of Exodus, of Isaiah, of Ezekiel. I do not this for your sakes, O house of Israel, but for mine holy name's sake. That's Ezekiel 36:22. God's people exist as a monument to his sovereign mercy, and the reprobate exist as a monument to his sovereign justice. James doesn't leave the statement hanging. He immediately anchors it in Amos 9:11 through 12, confirming that God's taking of a Gentile people was no apostolic novelty. It was covenantally decreed in eternity and prophetically announced in time. The nations were always in God's redemptive purpose. He knew his elect among the Gentiles before the world began. James continues in Acts 15:18, saying, known unto God are all his works from the beginning of the world. This is the capstone of the argument. God's works, including the specific taking of a specific people from specific nations, are known to him from eternity. There is no surprise in God's redemptive history. Every soul taken out of the Gentiles was known, decreed, and purposed before time began. So, in conclusion here today, Acts 15:14 is not incidentally Calvinistic. It is a text of sovereign grace. The Gentiles didn't find God at Caesarea. God visited them. He didn't make a salvation available and wait for them. He reached in and took out a people for his name, actively electing those who are his and actively decreeing condemnation upon those who are not. This is grace, sovereign, particular, gracious grace. All right, thank you so much for joining me here today. Be sure to give the video a thumbs up and share it with others. And if you haven't subscribed, please do so and click the notification bell to get updates when new videos like this one come out. So until next time, remember, true doctrine matters. God bless.
You saved us, Lord, even when we didn't deserve grace. You brought us into your light by loving us and taking our place.